like that, but pre-COVID, I can't. And even then, I think they were evening ones, so I'm not sure. Did we ever have an in-person one in the lunch, before lunch?
Yeah, we're not around to it.
Okay, well, we finally got around to it now, so thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. I hope you had a chance to get some refreshments. We've got plenty more. Feel free to help yourself before you go. We're really lucky to have with us today Dr. George McDaniel to serve as our speaker. He's the president of McDaniel Consulting, LLC, a strategy firm that helps organizations develop strategic plans and use recent history of a place to engage the public in new ways of historic preservation. For a quarter of a century, he served as the executive director of Drayton Hall, a historic site in Charleston, South Carolina, owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, operated by the Drayton Hall Preservation Trust, but which this agency played a role in saving it. He's a native of Atlanta. He earned a BA from Sewanee, an MAT in history from Brown University, and a PhD in American history from Duke. Interspersed through that were experiences in Europe, Africa, and Vietnam, where he saw peace and war and learned by experience about cultural differences and commonalities. For 40 years, he's built a career working in education at history museums, beginning with the Smithsonian Institution, and has earned awards at the local, state, and national levels. South Carolina honored his work by presenting him with the Governor's Award for Environmental Awareness and by the Governor's Award for Historic Preservation, which makes him the first person in the state to earn both. During his last decade with Drayton Hall, he recorded oral interviews with a range of people, and the resulting book, Drayton Hall Stories, A Place and Its People, is the first in the nation to portray a historic site by presenting interviews and viewpoints from white and black descendants, board members, donors, historians, architects, preservationists, and tourism leaders. The book serves as a model for the preservation of oft-neglected recent history of historic places. Throughout, he's been kept in the real world by his wife of 41 years, Mary Sue. Isn't that the truth? And his two sons, George and James. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to introduce my good friend, George McDaniel.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate everyone's coming today. And we have someone, let's see, from Charleston, from the McLeod Plantation. Are you the furthest? Anyone come further than Charleston? James Allen? I think you win the prize for folks. That's great. Appreciate it. Let's see. Okay. It's great to be back at Archives and History. This is something is okay. And I want to thank everyone for the foundation who's really helped me on this work. Eric has just left, but I want to recognize Donna, and Elizabeth, and Ben Hornsby, who signs the checks, and maybe somebody else here. But the Archives History Foundation has served as a fiscal agent for this project, and it's really made a difference. It helped me in lots of ways, so I want to thank them. And the title of my book, and it's a product of many years of working in the field of public history. The title of my book is Drayton Hall Stories, A Place and Its People. Let me see if I can get the right control here. And these are some of the people I wanted to thank. And then just a word about me, as Eric was saying, I grew up in Atlanta, and I went into the field of historic preservation and public history and museums in order to teach. I taught before, and I found that teaching in a classroom, which I really enjoyed, but I also enjoyed education by working with historic sites and museums and historic preservation. And I sort of set my cap after when I was in grad school at Brown and also at Duke, to try to preserve those places that would be important for teachers in the future. And I found that so many places, Drayton Hall is really important, but what about the life of all the people who made the Drayton Halls of the South and of the world possible? Where are their places? How can people learn about them? And I began asking myself those questions when I was teaching, And you know what happens when you ask yourself questions. It goes back to you. And so that's what I've devoted my life to. And I want to thank my wife and my sons for sort of helping me through that process. So that's a little bit about me. I was in the Peace Corps in Togo, West Africa, and had the misfortune to be drafted out of the Peace Corps. I was double-crossed. They told me if I joined the Peace Corps, I would get a deferment. But the draft board double-crossed me. I was in the 1st Infantry Division in, excuse me? What? 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam, and then worked with the Smithsonian. And that opened up the Maryland Historical Trust, do historic site survey work. That opened this whole field of historic preservation for me. And why the title of this book, Drayton Hall Stories of Places People? Why is that? Well, as you think about that and as you look at the cover, what is historic preservation? Historic preservation is place-based, and so often the way we study historic preservation is by focusing on the place, on the building, on the architecture, and that gives something tangible. We need that. But what about all the people who made that possible? And so that's why the subtitle of my book is entitled Drayton Hall Stories, A Place and Its People. And the main title is Drayton Hall Stories because place and people together make a story. And some people wanted me to name it, title it, A Place and Its People, Drayton Hall Stories. But I wanted stories front and center. We shortened the title, and so A Place and Its People is good. But I thought, let's keep stories. So it's Drayton Hall Stories, and a story is a place and the people. All of you know that in your own life. If you think about where you live, where you work, it's a place and it's people that give that. Oops, that's not. Hold on, let me turn that off. That's one of my fans. And also, I think that historic preservation can be both. It's both divisive and unifying. The question is not either or. It's not either history is divisive or it's unifying, but it's both and. And we all have differences, and that's what makes history so interesting. We have different opinions, different lifestyles, different cultures, but then we're also we join together in so many ways. So throughout this, we'll say both and, underscored, not either or. And so, why do I have so many people in my book? I mean, over 50 different interviews in the book. Well, why so many? Why not 25? Well, I started to cut it. I thought so many people are interested in historic preservation. So many people care about historic places. And so just because you're a landscape architect doesn't mean you don't count. Just because you're a donor doesn't count, or you're a board member. And so often histories of historic sites are written by curators, by architectural historians, or by historians. I thought, well, let's bring up people together. And Eric just got back from the State House today. Well, who cares about historic preservation? Well, people at the State House do. And they need to be guided in that direction. And so, if we're going to be successful in historic preservation, we need to recognize all these people who have a hand in making us what we are. Making historic preservation what we are. Places are important, people are important. And so the book is about all these many people who care about historic preservation. And you can see there the types of people that I've interviewed. And then the last, it's like a mosaic. The book is like a mosaic that fits all these different perspectives together to create a picture. It's a mosaic. It recognizes differences, but it also recognizes commonalities and unity. Well, in the recent history, my book and my work when I was at Drayton Hall, I respected the 18th and 19th century. I wanted to preserve that, but I was especially interested about recent history because it was so ephemeral. It was located in people's memories. And so I did a lot of oral history. Tony Wood was on our board, is still on the board of Drayton Hall. And he said, when racing history is lost, we lose the history of preservation and the story of those people. So you think here in Columbia about the places that have been preserved here, or any place that you may know, why was it preserved? Who had painted in it? Charles Lee, here in Columbia, former director of Archives History, had a strong hand in the preservation of Drayton Hall. So did Fred Brinkman from PRT. And I tell that story about Drayton Hall's preservation because it could have been a clubhouse. Had not people stepped up and said, no, this place warrants preservation, could have seen a golf course and clubhouse there. Now, Charles Drayton, the owner of Drayton Hall at the time, wasn't going to sell it for a clubhouse. The developer said he wanted to do that. But, who knows? But it was Charles Lee and Francis Edmonds and others who really stepped forward to make that happen. So I interviewed Peter McGee, is in the book, his wife Patty, and the title of Peter's section is when I asked him questions, it was a two-word answer. And that two-word answers were Francis Edmonds. Isn't that right? I mean, because you knew her well. And there she is, next to Senator Hollins, and she was the one who masterminded the strategy to save Drayton Hall. They'd heard that the Draytons wanted to sell it because the two brothers who had inherited could not keep it up. The repairs needed to be made and taxes and other things, and they realized that they just didn't have the means to keep it up. So Francis Edmonds, if you see that next to Fritz Hollins, concocted this strategy. And what she did was when the National Trust came to Charleston for their meeting in 1970, the strategy was for the board members of Drayton Hall, of the National Trust, with Charles Lee, to go out to the site, only Drayton Hall, not Magnolia, not Middleton, but only Drayton Hall, still owned by the Draytons at the time, and to enjoy the site, which they did. They heard that it was for sale. And so Gordon Gray of Winston-Salem, tobacco mining, and some of the Mellons were there, DuPonts were there, and others said, we really need to save this house. The board members they came up with it, oh yeah, we really need to save this house. And then Francis Edmonds was there, Peter McGee was there, oh well, maybe the Draytons want to sell it. And so Charles Lee was there, and so that's how it happened. Got them out, they got to enjoy the site, and then on their own, seemingly on their own, they came up with the idea, and then the offer was made. And also, I asked Patty, who is very much engaged in historic preservation, why in the early days of preservation were women so much involved in it? And her answer was that, I said, why do you think so many women were so involved in preservation, historic preservation, in the early days? And her response was, if you had a desire to learn about decorative arts and antiques, and to take many courses and to do it as a volunteer, women had the time to do that at that time. Men handled the legal and financial affairs. In the early days, men couldn't get away from work to go volunteer in the house, but housewives could. Charles was lucky to have those early women. So what was it that the people were trying to preserve? What did they see? And architects see Drayton Hall as architecture, which is fine. And so architect Jim Thomas is in the book, Lane Keyes is in the book, and they describe the architecture of Drayton Hall. And there we see it's the oldest unrestored plantation house in America that's open to the public. It's a masterpiece of colonial design, military symmetry and so forth. And then it's directly inspired by the designs of Andrea Palladio, specifically from his 4 books of architecture, the designs of Villa Coronaro that he designed after the 1550s. And there you see on the left the Villa Coronaro, and there you see Drayton Hall. Except Drayton Hall is unique in that you see the portico on Villa Coronaro projects but doesn't recede. Drayton Hall, it both projects and recedes. And there you see it's the first fully executed building in America, that 5-part plan that Palladio enjoyed. That's the way it did appear. This is a painting of 1763. You can see that the entrance went up to the front. There's a colonnade that joined the two flanker buildings. And we know that this is original. And I was asking myself that question. It's a long story. Let's see, this doesn't. I'll put it here. But right there, you can see that? That's a lightning rod that was installed, and that had been taken down in the early 19th century. So archaeologists have found that. So we know that if this was a 19th century forgery or 20th century forgery, then we would see the lightning rod. And there are other things about it that tell us that it was original. That's a house in about 1880, after the Civil War. Nice calcium phosphate mining in Charleston afterwards. There we can see the corn growing up in the front yard. And they repaired the house, and it was in the 1930s. It remained in possession of the Drayton family until 1974, when it was purchased by the National Trust, and then the state of South Carolina owns about 500 acres of woodlands that surround the property. Well, what was it that we were trying to preserve? And the portico, as you all know with old houses, preservation remains an ongoing concern. And thanks to help from Archives and History, we've received help from the portico, from other paint stabilization, other things about the house that we've received from Archives and History. And here you see the stabilization of the portico, the concrete joists below that had been installed in the 1930s had deteriorated. We're threatening collapse, and so we needed to replace that. That was a very tedious process, very careful. As the architect, Glenn Keyes, who is not shown, well, Craig Bennett is shown on the bottom left. He said he was a preservation engineer, and he said the last thing that he wanted would be to be the chief engineer, preservation engineer for Drayton Hall, and have the portico collapse because his designs had failed. So it's very, very methodical, and they won the Governor's Award for art preservation as a result of that work. There's Craig Bennett on the left, preservation engineer, and Richard Marks, contractor, and Trish Smith, who's curator of architectural resources with Governor McMaster. And Richard Marks is a contractor, and he's in the book along with Glenn Keyes and Craig Bennett. And I asked Richard, what's special about Drayton Hall? What do you see that we may not see? What he was able to do is to look at the building, because he's a contractor and knows carpentry, brickmasonry, and look at it as a builder. And so he looked back at the work and skills that were involved in his construction. And I said, my question was, how is your work as a contractor, what has your work as a contractor taught you about the people who designed and built Drayton Hall? And his response was, the people who built Drayton Hall were experts in every respect. This is in the 1750s. They had the ability to take raw material available in the Low Country, such as the clay for the brick, the shell to make the lime, the timber to make the framing, and transform them into building materials, which included both the structural materials as well as the finer elements like the joinery, finish work, and casework. They not only had the ability to construct it, but they came up with the designs and the proportions on par with what the counterparts were doing in England at that time. Drayton Hall, the completion of Drayton Hall was a culmination of a keenly honed organization. So I think all of you who work with organizations, you can appreciate that. You've got to have everything organized in order for that thing to work, for whatever your goal is. And that's what one of the things that Drayton Hall represents. And there you can see on the right eye, or the picture on the left, I asked Richard Marks, what is it you see that visitors don't see? And he said, well, one of the things that visitors may not see is that all the floors were doweled together. They're horizontal, and to keep them from twisting, every 5 feet, every periodically, they're dowels placed horizontally that join the boards together. And then you can see the fine craftsmanship that was done for the brackets. I also interviewed Susan Buck, a paint conservator from Williamsburg, and I asked her, when you see the original appearance, what do we learn about the original appearance of Drayton Hall? And many things that she determined about the paint, but one of the things in the stair hall, if you look at that remarkable stair hall, you'll see the mahogany balustrade. Well, originally, when you went to that room, the walls weren't painted that kind of light blue, Prussian blue, but they were cream colored. She found that. And then she found that all the mahogany was painted that Chinese red, kind of an orangey red. So you had this cream colored wall contrasted with that Chinese red, which chinoiserie was very popular in the mid-18th century. So thanks to this work that we've done, we have a new view of Drayton Hall's original color scheme. And she had never seen anything like that in England or in America during the colonial period. Well, Drayton Hall is preserved, but it's also it's open today as a site. But what was it like as a home? What was a home? Charles Drayton was seen to left in his Navy uniform from World War II. I interviewed him. He's in the book. I saw Anne's about my age, and also Molly, and they're there as well. So I asked Charlie, I said, well, what was Drayton Hall like when you came out there as a child from Charleston? And he said, what were your childhood recollections of Drayton Hall? And he said, when I was young, Drayton Hall was absolutely wonderful. Since Frank, his younger brother, was younger than I could usually brought 2 or 3 friends with me with no electricity. It was early to bed and early to rise. My father blew a cow horn to call us in for lunch, and as soon as lunch was over, we were back out again, climbing trees, hunting, fishing, playing games, just having a lot of fun. I fished in the pond, catching small brim, and later in the river. I then asked him, why did your aunt, Charlie Drayton, why did she modernize the place in the 20th century? He said I'm not sure, but I think it was 2 things. One is that she never got married. 2 is that she owned it, remembered it, and knew it for what it was. I never knew how much money she had, none of my business to begin with, but I think she had enough because she traveled a lot. She simply didn't want the house changed. so it was never modernized. One of the modern facilities was an outhouse to the east of the house, and that's where we went. So it was a home. It was a home for all these people. And then I asked Molly, who's the older daughter on the right, who's with her father, Charles, and I asked her about what it was like. She said, well, when I was growing up, I thought everybody just had a place in the country. You know, 4 or 5, 6 years old, we just went up there, just thought, it wasn't anything historic about it. It was just a family home. And they spent their time digging for silver that they knew had been buried, in the basement of the house or in the barn somewhere. They dug around for silver. Then I asked Anne what she remembered about the house. And she said, I asked her about her aunt Charlie Drayton. She said, I said, what was it like to, what was she like? And she said, well, Aunt Charlie didn't especially respond to young children. On my mother's side of the family, you could hardly walk past my maternal grandfather that he didn't grab you and smother you in kisses. Aunt Charlie was not like that. I do remember a story about her and me. When I was little, Mother and I visited Aunt Charlie at her house on East Bay. I didn't say a word. On the way home, Mother scolded me for just sitting there like a bump on a log. Next time we visited, I had thought and thought, so when I thought the moment came, I asked, Aunt Charlie, why didn't you ever get married? So all those, it's flavor to the house. I mean, these aren't just people walking around. They're just, they're people like all of us. And here's another thing I said, when you visited, I asked Charlie, I said, could you describe Aunt Charlie's bedroom in Drayton Hall? And her bedroom was on the second floor of the house, looking out towards the river. It was Aunt Charlie's big, puffy 18th century 4-post bed. The room had been partitioned, creating a large room and 2 small ones, each with a cot and a dressing table. Aunt Charlie's cot was made by African Americans at Drayton Hall after the Civil War. I slept in one when growing up. Although the big bed in Aunt Charlie's bedroom was beautiful, she normally slept on the little cot in her dressing room. Why? Maybe security? I don't know. Even at 25 East Battery, she seldom slept in her large bedroom in the 18th century 4-post bed. Instead, she chose to sleep in a small room on a cot. So these are details, but they humanize the people of Drayton Hall. Here's Frank Drayton, Charlie Drayton's nephew, with his son Thomas Drayton and grandson, and there they are measuring themselves in the growth chart room, a growth chart wall that dates back to the 1890s, and Aunt Charlie is measured on that room. Every generation is there. Then Richmond Bowens was born in Drayton Hall in 1908. His father, sitting in the middle, had been born there, and his grandfather, Caesar, was born enslaved in 1855. And this Richmond as a young boy with his mother on the left. And Richmond Bowen described Drayton Hall as a home. And one would think, well, is he just saying that, just being African American, is he just saying that to me as a white man, oh yeah, things are fine, don't want to go there? And it may in part be there. He's a real gentleman. But I asked him to produce a memory map. And this is what it produced. And you see those black dots? His grandmother lived there, his uncle, his aunts, his cousins. He grew up in a community of extended families. There were no white people living there, so Drayton Hall was like a home. Drayton Hall was like a home to him. And so that's the Drayton Hall that he knew growing up in 1908, and that's the date from 1920. And then the African American Cemetery, we did a lot of work with him. He described traditional burial practices there. When someone died, they would take the artifacts that belonged to the deceased and place them nearby. If the person was a barber, maybe the barbering shears were there, or if they were a plow, there may be a plow there, or something related to a mule or whatever they did. So we did oral histories with Richmond in the cemetery. He's interred there. Then we have programs there. There on the bottom left is a memorial for his 100th birthday. And intentionally, I invited white people and black people to come. So not just black only, not just white only, but just as Drayton Hall, I'm using the word integrated in a way. I mean, hope you understand it's not an integrated power relationship, but in terms of spatial living there, black people and white, they live there together. But I'm not equal, I'm not saying that, but live there together. So it's a way of trying to bring people together today for a historic site. Also interviewed Richmond's niece, Annie Myers, shown on the left, and Lucille Blunt, who lived there in the 1950s. And that's Lucille's granddaughter in the back. And Lucille Blunt, Annie Myers became very much involved in the civil rights movement, sat in Charleston, was a sit-up movement at Crescent, Walmart, at Woolworth and so forth. And I asked her what led her to get involved in, did her parents encourage her? And she said, no, parents didn't encourage it, but they didn't stand in my way. They said, my mother told me, who's Richmond Boyd's sister, a change is going to come. And you're either going to get involved with the movement or you're not going to get involved with the movement. You do what your mother told Annie, you do what you think is right. And she got thrown in jail. She was involved in the hospital strike. She got thrown in jail. And when she called home and asked her mother, told her mother she was in jail, and her mother said, you're where? Typical parent, when you're where? And I'm in jail. And so, do you want me to come try to get you out? No, I did what I thought was right. I'm saying here. And so she did that. And she talked about how, but it was a value from her parents. A change is going to come. There's right and there's wrong, and segregation is wrong. And so she tried to change that. Lucille Blunt on the right, I asked her questions about Drayton. She lived there in the 1950s, and she describes Drayton Hall as a sort of gathering place for the kids' community. There were black people who lived up and down the Asheville Road, and their house, she lived with her grandparents, they'd come there and play. And so she describes that. And she describes her grandmother's values and what they meant to her. And people would come to the back door of their tenant house, and her grandmother would give them biscuits and food. And she was a young girl, 6 or 7 years old, and said, well, why are you giving them food? I mean, and her grandmother said, well, they're hungry. All we're going to do is eat it, so let's share. And her grandmother imparted those values of what we have, we share. What we have, we have. That's being Christian. That's what we do. That's what we do. One time when her grandfather was sit down, her grandfather, was sitting at the table, and her grandfather went to sit down, and just a young girl, 5 or 6 years old, she pulled the chair out from under her grandfather, bam, down the floor she went. So her grandmother, and this is in the book, said, that's a bad girl. You should have done that. So she teared up, she cried, and her grandmother spanked her. But you know what she spanked her with? She got a pine needle straw. Tap, tap, tap. That's all it took. She cried, she hugged and kissed her grandfather, hugged and kissed her grandmother, and she never did that again. Those are the kind of values that are there. She loved her grandmother, and she said, when my grandmother's hand hurt, my hand hurt. They had that kind of relationship. Those are things that you would never learn architecturally. You wouldn't learn about archaeology. What about the life in the house? And that's what I was trying to convey. I've done archaeology. I believe in archaeology. I believe in architectural history. I'm not saying not. But I'm saying we need to infuse that with the stories of the people who live there. And Bob Barker and early interpreters. What was Drayton Hall like when it first got started? And I asked Bob Barker on the left and Nancy Hudgens on the right about those early days of Drayton Hall. And Drayton Hall became famous for selling memberships. You go on a tour, and all of our guides sold memberships to support historic preservation, to support Drayton Hall and the National Trust. And I asked Nancy Hudgens about what is it that makes a good tour guide. And if any of you here related to historic house museums, this is for you. She says, Bob Barker puts his heart and soul into his tour. And that's why he's such a wonderful guide. He has fun on the tour and makes the people feel welcome, as well as providing information so that they want to become a part of Drayton Hall and see it preserved. That's why he sold so many memberships. Though we didn't know it at the time, those early days were special. And this is where leadership comes in, because you impart trust, you make it fun for people to work there, they believe in the higher cause, and they step forward, and that infuses, the leadership infuses the guides, or the whoever you're working with. Also, I was inspired by them too. So that's why all that's important. Carter Hudgens, the current director of Drayton Hall, refers to Drayton Hall as a national and international treasure. And it's really doing a lot of work in the 18th and 19th century in seeing the house preserved, especially the second floor and the stair hall going up. Jenny Sanford was on our board, and she especially liked our education programs, and she referred to those. She liked the integrity of them. We dealt with both I talked earlier about both the good and the bad. And so we see that, and she liked the integrity of it, and she also liked the respect. She also liked our descendants programs, black and white together, not separate one-on-one, but how can we use sites to bring people together? And so she believed that. And Peter Wood, the historian, has written several books, who's a professor of mine at Duke, and he wrote Black Majority, which was a path-breaking book in the 1970s. And he'd been to Drayton Hall, and he talks about historic sites in general. And this is what he has to say about historic sites and especially about Southern historical sites. I asked him, I said, from your perspective, where are we now in interpreting Southern history to the public? And his response is, approaches to the tangled take of the early South have certainly changed greatly in our lifetime. You and I have joined lots of others in trying to help along the way. For me, cultures are like individuals. To move forward effectively, they need an inclusive, honest, and forgiving view of their own history. We can't change the actual past, but we can open the darkest closets and explore them, confront the skeletons that hurt us all the more, and discard simplistic myths that get in the way of growth. In Southern public history right now, as in almost every other national sphere, we are a huge fork in the road. But let's imagine that our culture takes a road that leads towards a less selfish and more egalitarian future, based on sound science, broad history, and just law. If so, the Drayton Halls of the world, other historic sites, will play their part. So that's what he's urging that we do with historic sites, is that we use these places. We not run from them. That's what places like McLeod are doing. I think Historic Columbia maybe move in that direction. How can we use this tangled heritage? How can we do and treat that honestly, convey that to the public in ways that they understand and can deal with, and from that create a better world? And then Tony Wood, who is a board member and donor to Drayton Hall, referred to Drayton Hall and refers to historic sites and referred to his work at Drayton Hall as being transformative. And this is what he had to say. In thinking about historic sites, what do you think can be done to help remedy polarized race relations? What specifically might Drayton Hall do? He says historic houses and neighborhoods are not just about the past. They're important for the future because they enable us to explore today's issues wherever they happen. There's a power of place, which all of you know. You're in the field of historic preservation. You know about power of place, of authenticity, of knowing you are on the very grounds, in Drayton Hall's case, a plantation, where good things and atrocities have took place. Such sites are where contradictions in our history as a nation are to be seen. Being on the ground where history happened helps make the contradictions real and allows us to empathize. I can't imagine a better place in America to have a conversation about race than at plantation sites like Drayton Hall. Such sites are beautiful, calm, and safe, and where contradictions like freedom versus slavery or equality and inequality are made obvious, as is racism. They provide places where people can contemplate and discuss controversial issues, including school groups. Discussing such issues takes leadership. Leadership needs to be committed to telling the story as accurately as possible through scholarly research and tactful education. When an honest depiction of what happened at such a site is offered, and when it has courageous leadership, larger conversations can result and help bridge divides. And then Michelle McCullum is director of the South Carolina Heritage Charter, and what she makes a strong point is that so often at historic sites we accent telling the story. Interpretation. But she's saying story is not enough. We need to move beyond our site and engage the community. And Eric was just today at the State House, and that's engaging community. This archives and history, historic preservation doesn't happen unless we have political support, financial support, and so forth. So we need to move beyond just telling the story of our own place. And Lonnie Bunch was Secretary of Smithsonian and is today and was on our board. And this is what he had to say about the sunshine of remembering. And he's talking about historic sites. As a historic site, Drayton Hall demonstrates how illuminating the dark corners of the past makes us all better. There is nothing more powerful than a people, a community, and a nation steeped in history. There are few things as noble as honoring all of our ancestors by remembering the known and the unknown, the black and the white, the slave and the free. And he hopes that will help us all remember and remember our past. And he concludes by saying, I know as sure as I'm standing here, if we do that, our ancestors will be smiling. And there's Lonnie, a program at Rutgers. Here he is on the right, top right, a program for the cemetery where he spoke. And on the bottom right, he's in the middle when I took him fishing on the Couple Rebel. So, and he caught a spot-tailed bass. So that's that's in his office too. Just so you visit the Smithsonian, you'll see that that photograph of that. So, sort of in conclusion, when we think about the book, it really is an approach that I'm trying to urge, and that is we connect place and people, not either or, but both and all of you have places in your own community. And the book can serve as a guide, a model, and at the end I have about a 2-page guide for doing oral history and so forth. Both will be out on April the 18th. You got your bookmark if you do want to order it. It's the order information is on the back of the bookmark. I'll be speaking again at the Preservation Conference, and I thank you for that invitation. I'm doing workshops in Charleston, etc. And my main thing is to get this kind of approach used, and I hope the book can help serve in that way. And so I want to thank you. And Eric, did you want to mind if I ask you some questions, or do you want to?
I can't guarantee I'll give you the same answers as I gave you the first time.
That adds to the book. That adds to it then. But I thought it'd be nice if since we're here at Archives and History, for you to hear answers. And as you can just tell by Eric's response, we have not rehearsed this. So whatever Eric has to say. But as we think about historic preservation, about where we are today and where we're going to the future, I thought it would be helpful to hear from Eric. So here are some questions that I asked you in the book, and you don't need to answer those questions, but you can just, if you want to take your pick of any of those questions, you can.
Sure. Well, I mean, number 3 is always, we can always point. Every member of the staff here could probably tell you what number 3, what the answer to that is. Elizabeth, what's the biggest challenge facing historic preservation?
I would say money.
There you go. There you go. So that's it. Elizabeth's answered that one. Yeah, that's the greatest challenge facing historic preservation now. It's always been a costly endeavor. It's still a costly endeavor.
Sure.
There are more, organizations looking for funds for historic preservation because there's more and more being preserved. So that's a great challenge, especially for sites like Drayton Hall. There are myriad opportunities for historic preservation. There's things that people don't even think are historic now. Everyone thought mid-century architecture was awful, 10, 15 years ago, and now mid-century architecture is all that anybody wants to preserve. So it's those kinds of things. Preservation changes as time passes. And especially sites, I think I said something about Drayton Hall specifically about that question. And being a plantation with its history, with its past, a little less than half of its past being a site of terrible things happening to enslaved people, intermeshed with beautiful architecture and Palladian attributes to that architecture, all that kind of messiness of the past that we're really consumed with now, and rightly so, because it's kind of a reckoning since 2020 that we've been dealing with issues like this more directly. Mm-hmm. So it's challenging for a site like that to call upon people to raise money when there are so many other there's so many other organizations that are advancing social justice. How do you address social justice in a site like that? How do you address the past? So that's a great challenge for Drayton Hall. I thought that the best way to do that is to talk about specifically the lives of people who were enslaved, and then the lives of people who lived there after enslavement. You have to think that site has existed longer post-slavery than it did prior to slavery. Mm-hmm. And so what were the lives like of the people who were there afterwards? You know, what kind of life did they craft for themselves on that site? When they were the only people really on the site for the majority of the time, when the Draytons would kind of come in and go out and come in just to kind of almost camp out in an old decrepit house. It's this kind of, and then comparing that life to the lives of the enslaved people who worked there, you know, the things they did, the agency they had in their lives, how did they shape their world, even under challenging circumstances, terrible circumstances. So I think that's what plantations have to focus on now. I think that's the only way that they can survive in these kinds of circumstances. They have to address what took place there that was so awful, and then while at the same time the triumphs of the people who lived there. I think we've had plenty of time to talk about, you know, that Magnolia, Moonlight Magnolia's picture of these places that existed for 100 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, George, I've gone on and on.
No, that's fine. No, I think it's really helpful. Yeah.
Well, historic sites have always played an important part in history education. I think place, and that's what I was getting to with that tangible examples of the past, that, you know, if you want to teach people about the past, you take them to a place where you take them to a house or a location where something took place, get them on the landscape, get them within the structures themselves, and then have really good interpreters talk about those structures, that place, and, you know, how, I don't think there's anything that is more evocative than location when it comes to telling the history of a site.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a Civil War historian. I'll give the example of Gettysburg. There's nothing more evocative than standing on any part of that ground and then being able to determine who was there at that time and what were the circumstances. I mean, it's just, especially at sunset or something like that. You know, it's just this kind of eerie calm over battlefields like that, you know, knowing of all the lives lost in those places. And it's really the same way with places like Drayton Hall. Yeah,
I think that's so important to have these places, you know, like McLeod Plantation, other sites, and that you work in as a student here in public history, historic preservation, and I hope this has helped you. You're thinking about power of place. And if we combine that with a story of people, we can. I think we can create change, so we can make this world a better place. That's what we're here for, anyway. I mean, that's what I think we are. Maybe people like Elizabeth doesn't believe in that. But just want to make people a bad place, but I'm just kidding. I think that for all of your work, like Elizabeth's work, there's so much that's done behind the scenes that we don't know about, but it's so important. It's at both and you've got to do both. And if we're going to be successful in historic preservation, make some of these changes that Eric was talking about earlier, they're going to happen. We have to be the agents to make that happen. Whatever y'all are doing, whatever you may be doing, you have opportunities to move us all forward. So I'm going to stop on that note. Thank you very much. And we're open for questions. Open. Any questions? Anything from a student? Okay, there we go.
Has the issue about using a site like Drayton or other sites as a celebratory thing, like for weddings, or has that come up at Drayton?
That did not come up when I was director, but it's come up since then. And I know a number of historic sites are dealing with that. Middleton Place is dealing with that. Drayton Hall didn't do that many weddings, but there are other occasions, and so that's an issue. And my answer to that is sort of twofold. One is sort of short term, you know, what's the answer? and I'll come to that, but the longer term is what can we do to interweave our sites so that black and white, we have people just in decision-making positions. And so our boards are more integrated. And we can discuss that at a board, or director can kick tires with someone who's African Americans who may be different, have a different perspective than I as a white person. So that's sort of the longer view. That's where we need to have that kind of these conversations. And when I was talking about these descendants programs and other things, that was what I was sort of getting to. I mean, you have these programs. People get to know one another, they talk to one another, they see one another as individuals. And then when a problem arises, you can go talk to that person. And I was doing family history with the Bowens family, and one of Richmond Bowen's, I guess, grandnieces got really suspicious and started, things that maybe I was doing that just, well, why are you doing so and so and so and so? Why are you doing so and so? And I hadn't even thought about it through those lenses. So I tried to explain. And of course, once you start trying to explain, it's just, well, that's just all smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors, smoke and mirrors. So I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And so I called Rebecca Campbell, two of the African American descendants. I said, what do I do? I mean, this is going on, and we'd work with programs together. We'd have those conversations, we'd have lunch together, dinner together, those kind of conversations together. And she said, George, we'll deal with it. And so they dealt with it. And I didn't get any more calls from that, distant relative and so forth. I mean, I'm not sure what they did, but you just need that's where the long view is we need all the more to bring in into the decision-making process, so it's integrated not just to be PC, but because that's the nature of historic sites, and here in the South, that's the way it is.
Is Boone Hall? Now, Boone Hall made a considerable amount of money off renting that. What's called cotton barn. That structure they built on.
The barn.
Are they still?
I don't know. I went to Boone Hall a while ago. My son George and I went there, and they were doing some golf tours. They had interpreting slave quarters. I don't know what they're doing with their sites now. And what I think Middleton Place is doing is that for their rentals, and for weddings or whatever special programs, they're taking either all the money or a significant portion of that money and putting it into a scholarship fund for African American descendants of Middleton Place. So there are different solutions because sites need to make money. I mean, you mentioned money. Well, roof doesn't repair itself. You know that. Porch doesn't repair itself. Guys need to be paid. So you need money. It's not money by itself. It's not evil. But what's your mission? And I've always been a belief that mission comes first, and then money is the muscle that helps you achieve the mission. But you need to be clear about what the mission is. And if your mission is, let's say, education, well, that's there, and then the money comes there, but you're not renting the house just to make money. You're renting it so you can preserve the history and educate the public. So that's what you do. And so with that kind of mission in mind, you talk to different people and come up with solutions. So that would be my take on that. But it's more complex than that. I'm not director, so I can say things, but I'm not in the act of it. But regardless of whether the issues come in, I think now it's time, way past time, but to interweave in our boards now. I'll be for having immigrants on our board, first and second generations on our board, because they have a different view of history than we have, but their culture needs to be preserved as well. Okay. Anything else? Don, it's about time. Are we?
Yes, Dr. Porter. book cost?
Hmm?
How much the book cost?
Book costs $39.99, $39.95.
And it'll be available when?
No,
It'll be available when? Hopefully.
hopefully, it's supposed to be by April 18th, but that's Easter Sunday. I mean, that's what I was told. I thought, I don't think so, but I'm gonna say mid to late April, mid to late April. And you can order it from Evening Post Books, whose website is on the back of the book card. So get the book card, and you can order it. And I hope that I hope you buy it, but mainly want you to use it. And this is just a small sample of the people that I've interviewed. So you look at just one place, and you can do it yourself. One place with different perspectives. And I brought Michelle McCullum in to show how a tourism person looks at a site. Well, that's a different approach, but tourism really important for historic sites. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much. I enjoyed it.